All right, welcome back. I'm joined now by Officer Darren. That's how we're going to identify him. We had a great conversation. Gosh, it's been several weeks ago, and unfortunately, technology is not always kind to me. And unfortunately, for whatever reason, we had some technical issues with that. So I'm so thankful that he took the time to sit down with me again. He is a police officer in Texas, and our initial conversation was right after the events that took place in Dallas. We're a little bit away from that, but it's still a good discussion to have. And he wrote a great blog post. We'll be tweeting that out again. We've tweeted it before. We'll tweet it again so you guys can read it. But welcome back. Thank you again for Darren for sitting down, Officer Darren, for sitting down and speaking with me again. It's such a pleasure.
Well, thanks, Sharona. It's good to be back on with you again. I hate that you had the technical difficulties that
Uh,
you. I'm glad we were able to get our schedules to coincide again and
yeah,
be able to have this discussion because I think it's important.
it's very important, and I am too. And thank you so much for being so patient and kind about those issues. You know, it does happen, but I'm always cognizant of the fact that people have busy lives, and I appreciate when people sort of donate their time to come on the show and talk about these things. So, because we didn't get to play that last interview, tell everybody, just a little bit about who you are, and then we'll talk a little bit about your background in detective work.
Sure, I am. Well, you just said it. I'm a detective for a small town in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I've been a sworn police officer a little over 15 years. Prior to that, I was a 911 dispatcher. So I've been working in policing going on 22 years now. It's been my passion. I love getting out and helping people. I've done a lot of different things over my career, from your standard patrol officer to I've been on a tactical team. I've been a school resource officer, crisis negotiator, advanced accident investigator. I've accrued over 4,000 hours of continuing training, and I've had a wonderful career doing what I love and trying to make a positive impact on people.
Well, that's so important. It's important to do what you love, and wanting to make a difference, I think, it is so important, and that sort of ties into a discussion that we're recording this on Sunday night, and this is going to be played on the Monday podcast. We're going to be discussing. I posed a series of Twitter questions and got some very interesting responses about whether you should be more concerned about your audience or building your audience. And to me, it's like it's the difference between leading and following. And so, for me, I do this. It's really a labor of love because, I want to make a difference. And if there's a lot of information that I think you and I both have that we can share with people, and the more conversations we have about these things, I think the better.
Absolutely. I think dialogue is what's important. And,
Hmm.
the key root of the word dialogue, it has to be two people
Right?
and it has to be a sharing of ideas. And I think the biggest thing that we fail to do right now, and it's on both sides of, the current discussions, be it through the media, through social media, or in our neighborhoods, is that one side or the other is failing to listen. And
Hmm.
it's really important that we listen and that we try to understand the side, the point of view, the ideas that are being portrayed.
I completely agree, and I think communication in anything is vital and important, and I agree with what you said because a lot of times there are people who don't want to listen, who are unwilling to listen, who are set in their ways or think that they don't their learning process about whatever is it's done and they're fixed, and you don't have anything to teach them, and we've got to get beyond that and realize that learning is an ongoing process, and there's always life is always showing me that I have so much to learn.
Absolutely. I think the moment that we think we know it all, life will hand us a great big slice of humble pie.
Yeah, No doubt, no doubt. Our last conversation was so good. And if you'll let me just go back to some of the things we talked about there, and then there's some new things that we're going to touch upon this evening. But you obviously you saw what was going down with Alton Sterling and some of the other incidents, and then the tragedy that took place in Dallas. As a police officer, who's sworn to serve and protect, how did that affect you?
Well, first, just to clarify, I think both of those situations were a tragedy.
Yeah.
Um, Either Mr. Sterling's situation or the
Yes.
Dallas PD situation, they're both tragedies because there was a loss of
Absolutely.
life.
Mhm.
Anytime there's a loss of life, we need to look at it, figure out what happened, and then figure out how we can avoid that in the future.
Mhm.
Um, you know, the I was on vacation when all that went down. I had taken 2 weeks off from work, and the first I knew that anything was going on. I was in Visalia, California,
Mhm.
and woke up in a hotel room, and my wife was next to me, and she said to me as I picked up my phone, as I always do every morning, she said, "You might want to stay off social media today." And
Yeah.
this was right after the Sterling shooting in Baton Rouge, and I watched the video, and the what I saw on the video, and this is from, of course, my years of training as a police officer. What I saw in the video sparked questions, but not as to the legality of the shoot, but as to what happened prior to that.
Right.
What got them into that situation. It's unfortunate that that went down that way.
Yeah.
But
Very
I
sad.
had questions as to how did they get there.
Mhm.
And then, of course, we continued our vacation, and we were in or actually just outside of Santa Barbara, California, and I got a message alert on my phone that a police officer had been shot during a protest in Dallas. And my initial thought was the officer was shot, the vest stopped it, he's going to be transported to the hospital, he's going to be fine. And then as I started to follow the updates on social media, and then I started streaming one of the local Dallas news stations, I realized, how big this event was.
Right.
And the fact that, there were 10, 11, 12 police officers shot, five of them killed. There were, citizens shot, officers running towards gunfire as citizens ran away, officers shielding
Mm.
citizens with their bodies. And, I have to tell you that Chief Brown over at Dallas PD is amazing. And the things that he has done with that police department are revolutionary. That department has improved greatly over the last 5 or 6 years, or since he's taken the helm there. And so it's unfortunate to see that this type of thing happened in Dallas, because that's an agency that is really moving in the right direction.
Mhm.
Um, but of course, we all wear a uniform, and to the public, a lot of times a police officer in Dallas is no different than a police officer in Chicago, or a police officer in New York, or a police officer in small town anywhere USA.
Mhm.
Um, but we are a very segmented profession. It's a lot like school districts, if you will. We're an agency of government, and it's an agency of the local part of government. But it was a tragic set of events. I wore a mourning band on my badge for way too long following those events.
Yeah, it was a tragedy. You're quite right to point that out. And you wrote a very good blog post about it. What do you think? You said that it's a sort of a segregated profession. Why do you think that is, and what do you think we can do as a country to improve things?
Well, we're not necessarily segregated. We're segmented.
Okay.
There's all races work within
Right,
police,
right, right.
uh, but what we have is local control. The 10th Amendment to the United States Constitution affords the police powers, the ability for the states to make their own laws, and to have police forces that then enforce those laws. And each city wants to control how crime is fought in their jurisdiction. And that's why you have different police departments within a geographical area. Here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, I live or work in Tarrant County, and there's 33 police agencies in Tarrant County, because that's how many cities there are, or that's how many different governmental entities enforce the law. And that's how things are done. Now, I don't think we could ever get to a national police force or anything of that nature because the Constitution prohibits it.
Mm-hmm.
The Constitution says that's a state job.
Hmm.
And no, what the
Really,
federal,
it shouldn't be. I mean, the federal government's got enough on its plate, right? I mean, it should be.
absolutely.
Yeah, it should be a local thing.
And what the federal government is doing is, through President Obama's task force on 21st century policing, is they're setting out what they call best practices or standards that local agencies should try to achieve. And some of these are very progressive, and it's some smaller agencies are never going to be able to achieve them because they just don't have the resources.
Mm.
But it gives chief administrators an idea of a direction that they need to move their department and a certain standard that we need to start holding ourselves accountable to. I think between the president's task force and the Police Executive Research Forum, or PERF, they're coming out with some great ideas that I think are really going to help start bridging the gap between the public and the police and start moving us in the right direction.
Yeah, it should definitely be, a local thing. What are some of the things that are in this best practices initiative?
Well, one thing is to, you know, depends on the initiative that you're talking about. In the state of Texas, we have best practices that are put out by the Texas Police Chiefs Association. And if you, as an agency, can show that you are following all 160 plus of these practices, then you can become recognized by the Texas Police Chief Association as a best practices organization. And what it might do is it'll say your agency must have a policy governing use of force, and officers must be trained in that policy of use of force, and that policy must include X, Y, and Z.
Okay.
And so as an agency, my agency is currently trying to be recognized. So what we do is we go through our policies line by line to try to make sure that they conform to that standard. And then all of our officers are trained on that policy, and we can check that one standard off. And like I said, there's over 160 of them.
Right, right.
So it's a long process for an agency to go through. But I think at the end of it, that the agency is more professional, it's more geared towards the community, and it can hold itself in high regard because of what it's achieved. Over 50 agencies in Texas have achieved that recognized status, and hundreds of them are in the process.
What do you get I mean, is it just a pat on the back? What practical benefits do you get from achieving that status?
Well, the biggest thing is being able to go to your community and saying, we are holding ourselves to the highest standards within the state, so that you know, as a member of our community, that we're doing the best job that is
Or
recognized by experts at this time.
does the
Uh,
community care though? When we're talking about poor, low income, perhaps they're minority, perhaps not. But for poor people, they want their circumstances improved and they don't want to be harassed. I mean, you understand what I'm saying?
I know where you're going. I kind of balk at the term harassed because that's not what we do. We
And
address issues that are out there as police
I
officers through
think good
employee
police officers do not, but I think that there's some evidence that there are some police officers who do.
There are some, absolutely, but I don't think that that's going to be the bulk of the 800,000 plus police officers in the country. But I think when you look at what you're calling the low income, the disenfranchised,
Right.
the that part of society, that we need to look at this from say Maslow's perspective. And if you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, one of the things that he talks about is that the very base of that pyramid is food, shelter, and safety.
Yeah.
And if we're not fulfilling all of those things right there, then the performance of their police force is not going to be as high on that list. But we as a community, and this is something that Chief Brown, following the shooting, said that we're asking the police to do too much. And I think this is where he's coming from, is that as the police department, it's not our responsibility to make sure that they have food and shelter. Safety is our responsibility, and we'll be out there doing our best there. But there's got to be other parts of the community, other parts of society that are going to help these people get past that lowest rung of Maslow's hierarchy of needs in order to be effective. And I really don't think it's fair to put that on the shoulders of the police force. They've got enough that they're trying to deal with right now.
I would agree with that. I would definitely agree with that. Although, you know, you do see, and they're always heartwarming stories of, you know, there are police departments and individual police officers who do those things out of the goodness of their heart, and you know, and you see, like when there's tragedy, you know, for example, what's going on down in Louisiana, you know, you see people donating their time and other things to help alleviate those things. But I think my point more is those people, for them it's really more elemental or fundamental. And so while those programs I think are great and important, what can we as a country and police officers in particular do to alleviate the divide that seemingly still exists between certain communities and law enforcement?
Well, I think really the number one thing we have to do is we have to communicate, and we talked about this at the very beginning of our conversation
Hmm.
this evening,
Hmm.
and that is that we have to listen. And it goes both ways. We as the police have to listen to the community to hear what the problems are, and to be compassionate towards what those problems are, to recognize the emotion behind what's being spoken. But at the same time, the public's got to listen to us as well. And you know, when we tell people that, you know, I'm sorry for the situation that you're living in, the circumstances that you're living in, but I, as a police officer, don't have the ability to change that. You know, what we saw in Milwaukee last week was horrific. You know, here you have a community that is that has just fallen on some hard times, and you know, a police officer shooting a suspect who pointed a gun at him. Triggered off riots where businesses were destroyed
Hmm.
and property was destroyed by people who had nothing to do with anything in that instant that set it off. So there's got to be a point where both sides listen to each other and we start working in the right direction to heal the divide that's there, and to get everybody cooperating to make our communities a safe place to live.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, definitely. You know, we're a little bit, you know, past the events that we're talking about, so it's kind of easy to, I don't want to say talk about this in a vacuum, but you know, the news cycle being what it is, you know, it doesn't get whatever's flaming at the moment is whatever click worthy, and that's kind of a topic for today's show too. Uh, how can, you know, it seems like you know, most people are really concerned with the things that are most immediate to them. But how can we make it a priority for you know, for police departments and for our government to, you know, to work on these things and to ensure that they don't continue to happen again?
Well, the number one thing as community members, you've got to talk to your community leaders, and those community leaders can be your councilmen or aldermen or representatives. You know, whatever you have in your local area, is talk to the people that you've elected that represent you in government. You know, there's not a police chief around that doesn't answer to a city manager, a mayor, or a city council. So if you want to make changes in your police department, talk to the people that you elected
Mm.
to represent you in your local government.
It's so
And
important to be
and
involved in local politics. So
exactly, there are a ton of ways to get involved, even as, you know, as a citizen and not as an elected representative. There are boards and commissions that you can be appointed to, that you can volunteer for, meetings that you can show up and voice your opinion. And the whole thing is that if you want to be heard, you got to deliver the message in a way that you're going to be heard, and not dismissed. And we have a lot of people saying messages in a way that are being dismissed because they weren't listened to appropriately on all the times that they tried to talk. And that's where our government leaders have to do better at listening. And everybody's got to do better at listening. I think
ab-
it's our worst problems. Everybody's out talking, but no one's listening.
absolutely, I
Uh,
completely agree.
but try to get involved. Speak with the leaders within your government. Let them know what the problems are. There's not a police officer that I've met in my career that was not genuinely interested in creating a safe community, and that's why we take this job. Some guys are a little more zealous at it than others, and some their motives change a little bit over time. But the number one thing is they're out there to try to stop lawlessness, to suppress crime, and to get justice for victims that are there.
We often hear about a blue code, and what do you think about that? Is there a blue code? And if there is, what can we collectively do to encourage police officers to help root out some of the problems within their own departments?
And that's one of the things I've talked about with the People Focused Policing Project, and is that we have to have accountability. And that accountability is not just from us as police officers to the public, but that's the individual police officers to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And when we see another officer doing something wrong, we need to tell people that that's wrong, and we need to stand up and say that's not the right way to do it, and we need to tell that officer that, we need to tell supervisors that, so we can take the appropriate action to either retrain that officer or get that officer into a new line of work. A little bit of anecdotal evidence here is I talked with one of my supervisors at my office, and we were discussing this issue, and we mentioned the Walter Scott shooting that
Right.
was
Mm-hmm.
in the Carolinas, and this is the guy that tried to take the taser away from the police officer, and when he
Right.
couldn't get it away, he took off running, and the officer shot him in the back.
Mm-hmm.
And the officer did some silly things after that, and I think that officer did a very poor job, and he was, indicted on either a murder charge or a manslaughter charge, and that's what needed to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have a problem coming on your show or going on anybody else's show and saying that officer was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But what most police officers will say when they see that video and when they hear that story is, I've got a lot of questions about that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they need to come out and say that's wrong because they know
Mm-hmm.
that's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But we're very hesitant to condemn another officer,
Yeah.
mainly because we know the number of variables that go into each situation, and that unless you're in that situation, you don't know all the information.
Yeah.
So it's officers are just very hesitant to say that, and that gives the public a perspective, or a perception, I should say, that officers always cover for each other. But
Yeah.
the truth is that we're all analytical thinkers, and we know we don't have all the information. So it's hard for us to come out sometimes and say, well, that's just wrong. But I think that's what needs to happen is we need to publicly say the officer made a mistake here. As part of my management training that I just recently went through, I heard a great quote by the late chief of police from Corpus Christi, Floyd Simpson. He was killed in a motorcycle crash about a year ago, but one of his favorite sayings was, if you mess up, you fess up, then you clean up and move on. And that's something that we're not very good at doing in policing, is when we mess up, we try to cover up, and then we try to clean up, and we never really fess up. And I think the public is generally somewhat forgiving if you come out and say, hey,
Completely agree.
and this is what we're going to do to fix it and keep it from happening in the future.
You know what they say, the cover up is always worse than the crime. And maybe, and
Absolutely.
what's worse than a family losing a loved one, but it is bad when someone, does try to cover up like that.
Exactly. And, there's a Supreme Court case that came out in 1989. It's called Graham versus Connor. And the Supreme Court came out and said that when we're looking at a police officer's action, we can't look at it with the benefit of 2020 hindsight, but we have to look at it from what the officer knew at that time and what a reasonable officer in that same situation, under those same circumstances, what a reasonable officer would believe. And so it's hard for the public to wrap their mind around Graham, and it's a protection for us as police officers, because a guy reaching into his waistband can pull a gun and shoot me before I can do anything about it. And that is a threat, especially when he's told to put his hands up, and that's the motion that he makes.
Mm-hmm.
And the Supreme Court recognized that in 1989, that any reasonable officer in that situation would know that action is faster than reaction, and if that person produces a weapon, the officer is going to get shot and possibly killed before the officer can react. Now, that's something that the public doesn't understand because we see it differently on TV. and we see it differently in the movies, where the good guy is always able to do what he needs to do to survive. But in the real world, that's not the case. So, it's important that the public tries to start understanding the truth behind what we do and the reasons behind what we do. It's hard, and sometimes we as the police need to do a better job of explaining it. And I think that's something that's happened. There was a shooting in Fresno in late June, and the initial video showed the police officer shooting the guy on the ground twice while he's on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And the public is outraged because here's this police officer. The guy's already been shot twice. He's on the ground. Then they shoot him 2 more times. But when you see the body cam video and you see the guy reaching into his waistband, you now understand, or at least I understand as a police officer, the danger that posed. And then you hear the commands of the officer saying, keep your hands up, keep your hands up. We don't want to have to shoot you again. But the guy apparently was intent on the police shooting him and killing him, which is what ultimately happened.
Yeah, it's definitely a profession that calls upon you to make often you make split second decisions, and time is not going to allow, because I do, since we've already sort of broached the subject, I definitely want to talk about your people focused policing, and I don't want to keep you too long. But an area that does concern me, and I think we talked about this last time, is the militarization of the police force, and this whole shoot first and shoot to kill, and how you what kind of balancing act that is. And hopefully we can, and I know that you're very one of the things that you like to talk about is guns and mental illness. We talked about that last time, and that was a great discussion. I hope you'll come back for that. And we're not going to even have time to get to police quotas, because I want to talk about the people focused policing website, and how that came about, and what it is.
Sure. Actually, the spring of 2014. So you're going to have to go back. This is pre-Ferguson. This is pre-Eric Garner. This is before all this happened. I had had multiple conversations with my lieutenant. And we're both kind of calm, level-headed people. And we're both very analytical. And we started looking at problems that exist within policing. And I started coming up with the concept that as officers, we need to do a better job of relating with the public. And our discussions kind of evolved, and we kept talking about it. And then Ferguson happened. And I wrote a post, 10 things I learned about, or what I learned from Ferguson, Missouri. And that post is on the peoplefocusedpolicing.com website. Okay. And in there I talk about transparency, I talk about communication, I talk about empathy, and I talk about the things that are kind of the foundation of people-focused policing. And as I went through the Bill Blackwood Law Enforcement Management Institute of Texas Leadership Command College, which is a big word to basically talk about some advanced management leadership training that I went through over the last 2 years here in Texas, I had to write a research paper. And the paper that I wrote was based upon the concept that I developed called people-focused policing. Everybody's heard of community-oriented policing, and this is a concept that came from the 70s and the 80s, and it really took hold in the 90s. And the idea there is that we as the police need to form community partnerships to address crime issues, that we need to reach back out and become re-engaged with the community. And then that kind of evolved, and another policing model came out called problem-oriented policing. And that concept was we need to take these community-oriented partnerships that we've created and then come up with some innovative problem-solving strategies to get to the root of crime problems within our community, which, that's a great idea. But the problem is that nowhere in either one of these models does it work with police officers on how to deal with people on a one-on-one basis. And that's where I want people-focused policing to come in. And that's where we talk about empathetic communication. We talk about respect and dignity as being the backbones of an organization, of a program, of a model of policing that I think allows us to more effectively perform the other two models. And I started writing on that. I've presented now twice through this management college to both police practitioners and academics within criminal justice. And I've received big support from them saying I need to take this to the next step. So, actually last weekend, I started the website, peoplefocusedpolicing.com. I started the Twitter account, and I am trying to get the word out with the hopes of getting to the point of doing training classes for individual police officers on how to effectively communicate with the public so that we can avoid these use of force
Hmm.
situations. Because I think that's one of the big things is that these problems are devolving. You know, they're digressing, they're going backwards, and we need to take them in a different direction so that force never has to be used.
I think it's great, and I think. Do you think that, as great as it is, do you think that it could be integrated into, like your local police department? Because that's where it's needed, right? Is to encourage. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Absolutely. Every police agency I've ever been a part of has a mission statement, and that mission statement generally has words like professional, courteous, respectful. All these things are written in the mission statement, but police agencies are hesitant to hold their officers to that standard.
Hmm.
So what I want to do is I want to work with administrators on ways that they can begin to enforce their own mission statement, their own core values, and start holding officers accountable to the standard that they set.
Hmm.
Many agencies are already doing this. Dallas PD is doing a great job of it. Austin PD, Chief Acevedo down in Austin, has a great program that he is training his officers to learn to be more respectful and to respect others' dignity as they're doing their job. This is a movement that's moving forward, and I think we just need to get it across the country and see officers start working with the community instead of against the community.
Yeah, it really is fantastic. It's such a pleasure to chat with you. I'm sorry we didn't get a chance really to hit upon everything I wanted to talk about because there's so much to talk about, right? I mean, it's an important topic and so so pertinent to so many people and I hope that you will come back and we can follow up and you can let us know how this website is doing. Now, do you want to give out your social media? Do you want to give out the Twitter handle for people focused policing?
Sure. Well, the website is peoplefocusedpolicing.com, and the Twitter handle is peoplefocusedpo. So it's at peoplefocusedpo, and you can follow me on Twitter. I'm trying to put out new content on a semi-regular basis as I can. Like I said, this is just getting going, but the more support that we can get,
Yeah.
the better we get this ball rolling and hopefully start making some very positive change in our community.
Yeah, it really is great. And the website, I'm on the website right now. I've been kind of browsing around on it. It's fantastic. Check it out. If you'll hold on the line, we're going to go ahead and take a quick break. When we come back, more Back Talk with Sharona.